Well, it's August, in year 3 of the conflict, and the challenges are greater than we've seen before. And the military situation has gotten much more complicated with the arrival of troops from Hezbollah, from Iran, from Iraq. The fact that certain extremist groups have joined the fight. We've got local councils popping up all over the country, elected by communities to help govern areas that have been liberated from the regime, but they've never governed before. And some of them are desperate for training to learn how to do their job. The humanitarian situation, because of the fighting, the increased fighting in certain parts of the country, has never been so difficult. Access is a huge issue for the humanitarian community, obviously, and it's hard to get into a community. Look at Homs, where in the center of the city you've got several thousand families still stuck. It's very hard to get humanitarian assistance into them. So it's a very difficult time. I'm pretty proud to say that the United States, because we have such a comprehensive approach to the situation in Syria, we're able to respond to a certain extent on all of those fronts. But it's a tough month. If you look at where our funding goes, and that's the best way to describe the different categories, by far the largest assistance from the United States inside Syria is for the humanitarian effort. Of the $1 billion that we've made available so far, and I say so far because I'm sure the number will go up, over half of that is for the humanitarian crisis inside Syria. The challenge has been, as I said a minute ago, because of the fighting, it's access. We provide humanitarian assistance to areas controlled by the regime, and we could provide humanitarian assistance to areas controlled by we call them the liberated areas, by the opposition. They're equally difficult to get to certain communities. The community in the center of Homs is one example. And the NGOs that we fund, I call them heroes because, well, they are. The work that they do in a city that's under siege to treat those that need urgent medical care is inspiring. You look at me, I've been doing this a very long time. I've seen a lot of reactions to a lot of crises, and this one inspires me. What these medical NGOs will do to set up a secret clinic in the basement of a building that's probably looks destroyed from the street to deliver urgent medical care to, say, a wounded rebel or a teenager that was caught in the wrong place at the wrong time when a shell landed nearby, to put that kid back together again, to stabilize him or her enough that then they could be moved to a better facility, perhaps across the border. Medical is getting a lot of our attention, and the numbers aren't big. I can tell you that we've done more than 80,000 surgeries. That's a lot of surgeries, but it's not a very big number. But each one of those surgeries requires secrecy, requires mobility, because these clinics have to move around all the time because the regime finds out where they are. The regime has targeted and killed over 120 medical professionals. We have to be very careful, but we're very active in this space, and that's why I call those particular NGOs that work in health heroes. Another big area we're working on in the humanitarian space is food. We think, estimates that there's between 6 and 7 million Syrians. This is out of a population of 22 million. So a third of the population is in need of some kind of help. We know we're not doing enough. We wish we could do more. We wish access were better. But with World Food Program, with the United Nations, we are getting food to, by our estimates, about 2 million people, so about a third of those in need. Is that enough? No, but it is a large number, and we continue to look for ways to do even more. The U.S. government itself, working with its own NGOs, is providing food to 200,000 people a day in Aleppo, in one city. We were particularly active there during the winter, getting flour and fuel to bakeries. I'm sure we'll have to do that again in the coming winter. The other big part of our assistance inside Syria, I mentioned these local councils that are popping up all over the place. And this is a good thing. This is communities trying to govern an area that had been under the control of the regime and is no longer. But how do they deliver essential services? How do you reopen schools? How do you get the hospital open again? How do you turn the water on again if a bomb destroyed a pipe? So the communities are electing councils, and we're going in and training them in what we call Governance 101. How do you make a budget? How do you put personnel practices in place? How do you appeal to donors for funding? We're also providing, so we're doing a lot of training, and along with that training comes a lot of small equipment, office equipment, radios, laptops, but not the kind that you would buy in the store. This is radios and laptops and equipment that is secure in the sense that you can communicate with others without risk that the regime is overhearing what you're talking about. We're also providing big equipment. We're trying to get cities ambulances, fire trucks, garbage trucks, big generators to be able to turn the power back on in a high school or a hospital, big water containers, particularly for schools. We're beginning to get equipment like this inside as well. It's not exactly humanitarian. It's helping a city get back on its feet after it's been liberated. I'd say those are the main areas where we're working inside Syria. I try to coordinate for the United States the non-lethal assistance to the opposition, and that does include to the Supreme Military Committee of the Free Syrian Army. We have provided, with a lot of help from our Department of Defense, over 300,000 meals, the same meals that our soldiers eat on the battlefield. We've provided over 300,000 meals to the Free Syrian Army. We've also provided several tons of medical supplies and equipment. And as we speak, we are buying millions of dollars worth of trucks, radio equipment, and more medical equipment in the countries surrounding Syria to improve their logistical capacity inside. I don't work on the lethal aid. What is in the news, which is a lot, is what I know about the lethal assistance that's being provided. I can tell you that when we discuss with the commanders of the Free Syrian Army what logistics they need, they may be thinking about some of the not just moving personnel, but moving other things as well. I don't ask those questions. I just ask them what their logistics needs are. The U.S. is doing more than anyone else to support the UN's efforts. The United Nations is working principally in parts of the country that are still controlled by the regime. By the terms of the UN Charter, that's what they're required to do. NGOs, that is not the UN agencies, but international NGOs are providing the humanitarian assistance to the liberated parts of the country. So this is a complicated one for us in the humanitarian area because we're working with UN actors and the International Red Cross in the regime-controlled parts of the country, and that's not a bad thing. There's people there that truly need help. But we're also working with NGOs because they are the only actors that are working in the liberated areas. So we have to support both, and we have to find a balance between how much for the liberated parts of the country, how much for the non-liberated, for the regime-controlled parts of the country. And it's a debate that goes on in Washington every time the president announces more humanitarian aid. But no country gives more to the UN effort than the United States. But I go back to what I said before. The needs are far greater than any country is providing right now. I wish we could all do more, but the single greatest factor limiting what we're giving is access. It's really not funding. It's the ability to get in and deliver the aid.
U.S. aid goes to areas that are controlled by al-Qaeda groups like al-Nusra or Jabhat al-Nusra or ISIS?
The NGOs that we fund do, absolutely. Yeah. And we have a policy when we're delivering humanitarian assistance. We may not tell the community that we're delivering the aid to that this food, this medicine, these blankets are from the United States, but we will tell the people in charge, even if there are enemies. Because we have found over the years that it's better not to surprise people later. If a community, if the people in charge of a community, even our enemies, know where the assistance is coming from, either they will allow us to deliver the assistance and help us if we have problems, or they won't. And so our policy is to let them know. So yes, we are working in some communities where certain of these groups are present. Part of our strategy for providing the big equipment that I talked about, the ambulances, the fire trucks, the garbage trucks, to other areas is to counter the assistance that some of these extremist groups are offering to those communities as well.
Let's talk about the refugees. So what is the situation for Syrian refugees in Turkey in particular?
Well, in the region, there's almost 2 million now that have left. In Turkey, it's about half a million, 500,000, between refugees that are living in camps that are managed by the Turkish government and what we call urban refugees, or refugees that are just living in the community. We're doing this interview in a city in southern Turkey called Gaziantep. This particular city has a large now population of Syrian refugees. The United Nations in some countries, Jordan in particular, is managing refugee camps. In Turkey, the Turkish government is managing them with help from the United Nations and us and other donor countries. There obviously is concern as the fighting continues inside into the third year that the numbers will increase. But of the $1 billion that I talked about that the United States has made available for humanitarian, almost half of that, just under 500 million, is for the Syrians outside of Syria. So we're pretty much 50-50 between helping Syrians inside and helping Syrians outside. Relatively little of that money is being spent, you asked about Turkey, in Turkey, because the government of Turkey has done such a very good job of looking after what it calls the Syrian guests. They don't use the word refugees that have come to Turkey. More of our funds are being used in Jordan, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Egypt. We leave, because we make most of our contributions to work with refugees to UN agencies, we leave that up to the UN to decide how much for this country, how much for that country. They're in the best position because they are usually managing the camps. We usually will supplement that then with programs to help Syrians that are living in the community. For example, I know that USAID in Jordan has taken a lot of their existing programs to help Jordan and shifted, with the permission of the government of Jordan, to focus on the impact of Syrian refugees on communities, in schools, in clinics, so that Jordan can better cope with the influx of all of these refugees. So we're doing many different things. One thing that's going on right now in Turkey is very interesting. Because the conflict has been going on so long, we're worried about children and how the fighting, how the moving around all the time, how the uncertainty, how the worrying about relatives is affecting them. And so right now we're opening what we call child-friendly spaces. It's a fancy word for a playground, where kids can get together and be kids. And we're training Syrian teachers who have come across the border anyway how to work with kids like this, giving them some new skills about what to look for if a child is having trouble coping, and what additional skills they might need to bring a little bit of counseling into the classroom. And these same teachers are teaching in Turkey, and the same thing is going on in Jordan and Lebanon, but they're teaching them in Turkey in schools that have been set up just for Syrian kids with Syrian curriculum, and thankfully, because we have teachers here, with Syrian teachers. Right now, we work very closely with an organization called the Assistance Coordination Unit. It was set up by the Syrian opposition to manage donor assistance for Syria. And it sat with us last month, so that was in July, and asked us to start planning for winter. I thought that was pretty good. That's pretty good forward thinking. They remember last winter, they remember how tough it was on the families that were displaced, and they've got us thinking about it again, so we're ready for this winter. So at least we're assuming we're going to be at this through the winter and planning accordingly. And I give Washington a lot of credit, and other capitals around the world, and governments like Turkey and Lebanon and Jordan, a lot of credit for sticking with the Syrians, continuing to provide the support, and I don't see anybody talking about diminishing.
Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I appreciate your doing this. One of the things we're pretty proud of is how much time we've put into training people who do what you do. We think it's so important for young Syrian journalists to be able to tell the story. And we're pretty proud of the fact that there's a lot of young budding journalists inside Syria today telling the story, and telling stories to the people in their community about what the dangers are, what diseases to look out for, what streets to stay away from because of snipers and other problems. And we've been able to train them, give them some good equipment that they can use, because getting the word out and telling the story is so important in a story like this.